Advent, a time of waiting, a time of hope, a time of expectation. In the first reading from Baruch, the time has indeed come. Jerusalem, take off your robe of mourning and misery, put on the splendor of glory from God. It speaks of the return to Jerusalem of the Israelites who had been in captivity. And God will ease the journey home. For God has commanded that every mountain shall be made low, and that the gorges be filled to level ground, that Israel may advance secure in the glory of God. Certainly, this fills us with expectant hope. The psalm reinforces this hope. Those who go forth weeping shall come back rejoicing. And Paul, writing from prison, assures the community in Philippi, I am confident in this, that the one who began a good work in you will continue to complete it. What does it mean to read this passage in the darkness of Advent? Well, even in the darkness of imprisonment, there is joy. Not joy in the circumstances, but joy in the God who sustains us. So much joy that you would almost think it's Gaudete Sunday. It is helpful to bring this joy with us as we consider the gospel reading. Luke begins by setting the stage and the historical context. He lists in descending order the powerful people who are in charge of the situation at the time, beginning with the Roman emperor and ending with the Jewish high priests. He makes it clear that the word of God came to none of these lofty men in their positions of power and comfort. The word of God came to John in the wilderness. In the wilderness. The Greek word eremos means desolate, uninhabited land. In biblical writings, it often represents vulnerability and uncertainty. The Hebrew people wandered in the desert, in the wilderness for 40 years. In Luke, it is a place of testing and hunger, sometimes danger and destruction, of being lost and then found. It is precisely in that wilderness place of vulnerability and danger that God appears. It is in this place that metanoia, a complete change of mind and heart, a turning around at the very deepest level, can occur. Now, but this idea of being in the wilderness generates fear. I know it does for me. And few of us choose to go into the wilderness, although most of us find ourselves there more often than we would like during our life journeys. Yet it is often in the wilderness times that God does something transformative, renewing, or inspiring. God often uses the wilderness times of life to teach, to stretch, to remake God's people. I'd like to pause here for just a moment for each of us to think about a wilderness time in our life. Reflect briefly on the pain, the uncertainty, the vulnerability. Now, think about how you got through it. I'd like to suggest that during the week we spend some serious time reflecting on this wilderness time in greater depth, perhaps even journaling if that's your style. Now let's reflect together. Quite likely, the winding road didn't suddenly become straight, but at least a bit less twisty. Also, too, the rough way did not become smooth, but a bit more navigable. And I'd like to make a fairly safe wager, if you don't mind. I'll bet that in none of our situations did God come like a flash of lightning and suddenly and smoothly solve the problem. Quite likely, it was another person, friend, spouse, relative, professional. Someone helped us through our wilderness time to emerge, perhaps scarred, but emerge we did. And this brings out the contrast between today's first and last readings. In Baruch, it is God who is doing the leading, the leveling, the smoothing. God is leading Israel in joy by the light of glory. However, in Luke's account, John is telling the people to do the straightening, the filling, the smoothing, the preparing. Isn't that how it works? It is the people who do God's good works of listening, leading, consoling, smoothing. If we have survived our wilderness times and hopefully come out stronger and more in tune with our inner reality, it is likely with the help of the God work of another. The gospel ends with the line, "And all flesh shall see the salvation of God." That leads me then to think that it is my job to do some smoothing, straightening, to be the backhoe and the grader. The differences that hinder the realization of God's vision are to be equalized, just as crooked paths are to be made straight and rough ways made smooth. In short, barriers that stand between all flesh and God's way for the world are to be dismantled. Barriers of race, ideology, class, gender, education, and even religion may be hurdles to be overcome on the way to the reconciliation promised in and by Christ. And when it comes right down to it, isn't that what Advent is all about? Working to fulfill the promise and living to realize the hope.